This is Jim Souhan. I'm doing my podcast, SOUHAN-UNFILTERed, from a hotel room in Chicago on Monday morning, heading back to the Twin Cities shortly. Obviously, I've been in Chicago to cover the Vikings-Bears game, and this is going to be the first in a series of what we'll probably call something like Wing It Mondays, where I just kind of recap or recrap, if you want to use that phrase, recap the weekend of Minnesota sports. Rough one this weekend, obviously. I really expected the Vikings to win this game. I thought that they matched up well with the Bears, catching the Bears when the Bears are all complaining at each other. Cutler had one of the worst games I've ever seen an NFL quarterback have at Green Bay the previous week. He just looks completely out of it. I know, and like Mark Cressman, I just wasn't sure if he had the right personality to bring this team back. And, of course, the Bears' problems didn't matter because the Vikings have way more problems. I tell you what, I don't think that the Adrian Peterson suspension has really affected the Vikings all that much this year. They before yesterday, they'd gotten a lot of production out of McKinnon. He averaged about 5 yards a carry, which is about what you expect Adrian to average. I thought he'd run pretty tough, and Matt Asiata had really done well in pass protection, had done well in goal line situations, scoring. Had even got some tough yards in short yardage situations across the rest of the field. And given that this league just isn't dominated by running backs anymore, I didn't think that missed Peterson that much. And yesterday, that changed. I really felt like McKinnon did not get the tough yards. I think he missed some holes. I don't think he ran aggressively. I thought he left a lot of yards on the field. I know he only had 8 official carries, but if he carried the ball better, if he'd run harder, I think he would have ended up moving the sticks and getting plenty more carries. And the Vikings should have been able to run it against this defense. And I'm speaking now before the Adrian Peterson news comes down. Maybe by this afternoon we'll know whether he's coming back or not. I've gotten deep into all the sociological things about Adrian Peterson beating his child with a switch. I'll leave that for another podcast. I've made my feelings known on that. Talking about purely football, I would say that this team would have benefited from his presence yesterday. Of course, now it probably doesn't matter because they're 4-6. They're 0-3 in the division. I don't think they have any chance to make the playoffs with or without Adrian. So whether he comes back or not, probably pretty irrelevant at this point. When a team plays this badly, what we all ask the next day is who's to blame. And I just think there's tons of blame to go around for this one. And I do think it starts with the quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater looked completely either confused or tentative yesterday. And I think you do get a slightly different view of the game when you're watching from the press box. You see the receivers' patterns, you see who's creating separation, you see who's open deep. You get a really clear picture of how well a quarterback is reading a defense, how well he's reacting to the rush. And I thought Teddy was borderline incompetent yesterday until late in the game when he was allowed to play with some desperation. And this worries me. We all worry about quarterback mistakes so much. I mean, us, fans, viewers, writers, coaches. We put so much stress on interceptions. And you can't have a great quarterback or a quarterback of a good team throwing interceptions in key situations. But I think with Teddy, he's almost gone too far the other way here. He looks like he's afraid to ever make a mistake. And I think that's why when he throws the ball away or sees the play isn't working, he looks so inept because he's willing to throw the ball away early. He's willing to throw the ball away in places where there's absolutely no chance of anybody making a play. I thought the Bears did a decent job rushing him, especially when Jared Allen beat Matt Khalil. Yes, that's another topic coming up. But I didn't think he should have been as overwhelmed as he looked. In the previous 2-3 games, he started off pretty slowly, and then something seemed to click. I still remember, Greg Jennings saying after the Tampa game that he went up to Bridgewater and said, "Hey, you're great in practice. You run this offense beautifully in practice. Cut it loose." And he played much better after that. He never had that moment yesterday and I really think, especially now that they're 4-6, they don't really need to worry about playoff implications. I really think Norv has got to go to Teddy and say, "Listen, it's okay. If you turn the ball over a couple times and you learn from it, that's okay. Take a shot." Of course, that leads to my second complaint of the day. The Vikings receivers gave him absolutely no help. They did not create separation. They don't really have a speed. Patterson's fast, but he doesn't really have what I would call functional receiver speed. He doesn't tend to go in and out of his breaks fit quickly, which is strange because when he has the ball in his hands, as we saw in St. Louis this year and plenty down the stretch last year, when he has the ball in his hands, he can be really dynamic. But I kind of grew up watching Jerry Rice, and as an early NFL writer, I covered a lot of 49er postseason games, a lot of Vikings 49ers games, and Jerry Rice isn't as fast, or wasn't as fast then, as Cordero Patterson is now, but he had functional speed. He could go into and out of his breaks at absolutely full speed while maintaining body control. Patterson just does not have that fluidity, doesn't have that ability right now. And he's still a young guy who hasn't played a lot of football. I would not write him off. He's too good an athlete to give up on, but he was a disappointment yesterday. Jennings was a disappointment before going out with a rib injury. And yes, while this team has missed Adrian Peterson to some degree, and especially yesterday, I thought that the fact that Rudolph really wasn't fully back yet hurt them. Rudolph could be the perfect antidote for Teddy's problems. He could be a kind of a nice safety valve receiver. I also think he was designed, in preseason to be their best big play receiver. I thought he was going to be the guy who ran downfield, who split defenses, who took advantage of bad matchups. The fact that he really was nothing more than a decoy yesterday, I think really hurt this team as well. Whether you blame the offense or the defense is always an interesting question because neither played well. I really do think this game is more on the offense. You gave up 21 points on the road to, even if it's a dysfunctional offense, still a remarkably talented offense. Anybody would take Marshall, anybody would take Alshon Jeffrey, anybody would take Matt Forte. The offensive line has been upgraded, and Cutler has great arm talent, even if he is difficult and a little weird. The guy can sling it. So giving up 21 points on the road, to me, is not offensive. You can pick on Josh Robinson if you want, but he just was physically outmatched. I didn't see any lack of effort. I didn't really even see lack of technique. He just got beat by bigger people than him. I did talk to a bunch of the Bears writers who I know, including Dan Wiederer, the former Star Tribune beat writer, now covering the Bears. And a lot of teams have played zone against those big receivers. Kind of the old idea of just keep them in front of you. Yeah, they're going to get their catches. Yeah, they're going to get some yards, but eventually Cutler will make a mistake or the drive will stall. Just don't let them get behind you. And, Zimmer's an aggressive guy. He thought his pass rush would be effective enough that he could play man-to-man, take away kind of the easy, quick pass, and that Cutler wouldn't have time to hit big plays downfield. And he was really upset about his pass rush after the game. He really did. He felt like, it's interesting, when Zimmer loses a game, he almost always goes back to technique. He felt like his defensive linemen, his rushers, were not using proper technique. They weren't rushing the right lanes, rushing the right way. He always seizes on the minutia of the game, and he might be right. But I think he learned a lesson. I just think he learned that if you put Josh Robinson man on man against a big receiver with no help, you're just going to get beat. You're going to beat. Whether you get beat quickly or down the field, you're going to get beat. I would like to see him at least disguise his coverage a little bit more. Now, he was pretty defensive about that yesterday when we asked him about it, and I don't think he agrees with that assessment, but sometimes it's funny. Sometimes the NFL head coach goes back and watches films, ends up kind of seeing what we all saw as the game went on. Another guy on the list of people to blame today, Matt Khalil. He said he thought he had a decent game except for the one bad sack against Jared Allen, but you just can't get beat that cleanly at any point when you're third, fourth pick in the draft, when you're supposed to be a guy who's just a rock for 10 years. I keep asking people around the team what's going on with Khalil, and I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. Well, everybody hopes they don't know for sure, because the easy answer is the one nobody wants to be true. The easy answer is he's just not good enough, whether he's not mentally strong enough, whether he's not physically strong enough, whether he's allowed his techniques to lapse over the last couple of years. And maybe it's that's it. I just see a guy who's not put together like an NFL left tackle should be. He's just not a big, powerful guy. And the only excuse I can come up with is that he has had nagging injuries. He has had a knee problem, and maybe that's kept him out of the weight room. Maybe that's kept him from really, really hammering the weights as much as he needs to be a dominant left tackle or even a decent left tackle. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, the thing is, all NFL players deal with injuries. They all deal with pain, and he has not overcome it. And the saddest thing about this was, I think they made the right draft choice. They took a really good left tackle with good technique, who played major college ball against really good athletes, and who came out and was a big part of the reason Adrian Peterson rushed for 2,000 yards. He was legitimately an exceptional left tackle his rookie year. That he's gone backwards this far the last 2 years is alarming, and at some point it's not going to matter what the reasons or the excuses are. He'll just become a liability. Now, a lot of people have been asking the last 24 hours, why don't you bench him? I just don't think that's realistic. You need Matt Khalil to be a good player for you. You need that. I don't think there's anybody else on the roster who would be a good NFL left tackle. And, let's face it, sometimes sports comes down to just hoping. The Vikings just have to hope that he turns it around. And if he doesn't turn around by the end of the season, then maybe they do explore other options. But it would really be damaging for the franchise to spend a pick that high on a position where you're supposed to have a nice, safe pick and have that guy crap out within 3 years. That would be an awful, awful development for the franchise. The other reason I think this might have been one of the first games where they really missed Adrian Peterson goes back to a theory I discussed when I covered Tony Dungy when he was the Vikings defensive coordinator back in the 90s. And he put it, this might sound kind of obvious, but he put it in a way that I haven't really heard many other people put it. He always said that he felt like on his defenses, he needed to have one star player, one really great athlete, obviously because you want players like that, but he said even more so as a strategist, if you have one great player who kind of attracts the attention, attracts the eye, then you kind of know that how the other team is going to have to game plan, because they're going to game plan based on your star. And it kind of puts you one move ahead in the chess game that happens every week in the NFL. And I felt like yesterday, with the Bears not having to worry about Peterson, with them not really worrying about who was going to carry the ball, they didn't really have to game plan for the running game. They didn't really have to game plan for Jerick McKinnon. I think they spent all their time planning on taking away easy throws from Bridgewater and collapsing the pocket, and it worked. And maybe it won't work on Bridgewater if he develops and learns from this, but it certainly worked yesterday. As many individuals as you can blame for yesterday's loss, I also think it's probably wise to take a long view on this thing too. I mean, I've been covering the Vikings since 1990, and they just hardly ever win in Chicago. And we're talking about, even when the Vikings were really good and the Bears aren't, like in 2009, they just hardly ever win in Chicago. And this might sound like an excuse, but I think it's it's closely related to fact. This is a very unique sod, and it's a very sandy field. The sod doesn't really cling to the sand very well, and I thought one of the big developments in the game was Anthony Barr is having a wonderful rookie season. He's a spectacular player. He pretty much won the Tampa game all by himself. Made big plays in the Buffalo game. And he couldn't tackle anybody yesterday. And if you watch the way he missed tackles, he would start reaching for a back, and his feet would kind of slide out from under him. Now, I talked to Chad Greenway at length after the game about that. He said that he's been playing here long enough that he comes down here and he basically puts in the 7-inch studs into his cleats. He puts in basically the longest cleats you can legally use because he knows you need all the traction you can get. And now, I think Chad missed some tackles too. I'm not sure it helped him a lot, but I think, but with Barr, Barr has the athletic ability to make every play, and he looked completely lost yesterday. I don't think Anthony Barr just suddenly had a bad game for no reason. He's been spectacular all year. I really do think there's something about the footing here that throws teams off, that maybe even slows down receivers in and out of their breaks when they're not used to it. The Vikings always look slow and fairly inept down here. They just do. And I can't, again, bad Bears teams have beaten the Vikings here, so I don't think it's necessarily the quality of the opponent that has led to the Vikings' struggles down here. Yeah, it's windy. Yeah, it's usually cold, but that's not necessarily unique to Chicago. I really think it has something to do with the sod. I just think, and even when even when they think they're ready for it, they just don't seem to run at the same speed. And I'll go back to McKinnon. I don't know what was going on with him yesterday. I was disappointed in his performance, but maybe that's part of it. I thought McKinnon had holes open and available to him, and he didn't get to them. And maybe that goes back to just playing on this different footing. The Vikings, even playing outdoors at TCF Bank Stadium, they know they're going to have good footing on that turf. It's funny too. Having covered the NFL since 1990, there used to be a lot of fields like Soldier Field. I think Cleveland always had terrible footing. I think Tampa at times had bad footing. Atlanta, all the places that played in the same stadiums as the baseball team, where you had beat up turf and you had some dirt patches or sod over the dirt patches. The old Anaheim Stadium, I think fields like this were much more common in the old days, and players were probably much more prepared for it. Right now, Soldier Field really is a very unique place for a road team to have to go and play. So I think we kind of have a wrap on the competitive portion of the Viking season. I really hope at this point what they do is push Bridgewater to start playing like an NFL quarterback, and that means one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of the difference between quarterbacking in college and quarterbacking in the pros. Some scouts I've talked to, talked to Rich Gannon in the past, and I love this phrase. They say in college, the quarterback waits for the receiver to get open, and then he throws it to him. In the NFL, you have to throw the receiver open. It's such a descriptive term, and it's right on. Defensive backs in the NFL, even those who aren't very good at making plays on the ball, are excellent athletes. They usually are able to stay fairly close to their guy. And that's where the quarterback has to know how to place the ball where the receiver can go get it and the defensive back can't. And it's very difficult to do, but that's what the great ones do. And Teddy not only hasn't done that, he hasn't looked willing to try to do that. And I think the coaching staff says, tell him, listen, we'll live with the turnovers. This is you learning how to play in the NFL. There's really nobody else we want in the game right now. This is a 6-week learning period for you, and we want you to come out the other side having grasped what it takes to win in the NFL. And that might as well happen this week against the Packers. It's a pretty daunting matchup, but there should be some plays available to Teddy. The Packers defense does give up yards. They create a lot of turnovers, but they give up yards. And this is one of those games where Teddy's going to have to make plays to keep pace with them, and he should go in with that mindset. Let's segue to Twin City sports in general here. It was a pretty terrible weekend for Minnesota sports. Now, the one positive development was that the Wild come back and start playing better, right at a point where they seem to be nearing a crisis. Parisi makes a big difference, and he should. He is their star. He's not their star. He's probably the best leader of any of the athletes on any of the Twin City sports teams. And he comes back and immediately scores a couple of goals, and they win a game. I actually thought that they caught a break getting to face Buffalo late last week. Just faced a horrible team. Their kids started playing better together. The victory at Dallas is probably the most impressive because you saw the kids start playing together. And I think everybody's been waiting for Vanek and Koivu to take control of that team while Parisi was out. Neither was capable of doing it. I really wonder if Koivu will ever be the same player. He just has not had any burst or offensive capability since he dealt with that ankle injury that he had last year. Maybe I'm making an excuse for him, but he's got to be better than this. He just he can't be this passive of player offensively. He was a good NHL player for a long time. He's got to be better than this. I also found it very interesting that Mike Yeo who has always been someone who wanted to fiddle with his lineups, gets 2 victories, bringing in a goalie off the bench over the weekend. That's got to be about the first time that's ever happened in NHL history. I still think this team is what we thought it was going in, which is a good, competent team that is going to be dependent on finding a goaltender who can carry them for stretches. And Kemper's had good stretches, but he's also had, when he's bad, he's really bad. And I still think he's the key to the season going forward. Gopher football, I think that entire program should be very proud that they built up such a wealth of physical athletes. Royce wrote about it recently. I've said it in the past too. Kill came to town talking about his strength and conditioning coordinator, how that guy is one of the keys to his success everywhere he's been. And he wasn't BSing. That you look now, 2 Novembers in a row, the Gophers have played big games in the Big Ten late in the season, and they have stood up physically against very good physical programs. Last year, they went toe-to-toe with Wisconsin. The only reason they lost, they couldn't complete passes down the field to open receivers. And I thought on Saturday they stood toe-to-toe with Ohio State physically. The whole difference in the game, I mean, this might sound simplistic, the whole difference in the game is quarterback play. Barrett played as well, I think, as I've ever seen a freshman quarterback play. He both running, passing, running the offense, running intelligently, picking apart a defense. I was just tremendously impressed with him. And Mitch Leidner, from a place I used to live down in Lakeville, just is not a Big Ten passing quarterback. He's not, and even by the low standards of the Big Ten. And they needed him, and he did not deliver. I know he didn't have a lot of help around him, but there are open receivers, and everybody would like to have Max Williams, and he didn't really give Max a chance to make many plays. To me, that's the whole difference in the game. So I think that Jerry Kill should be very proud that he's built up a program to the point where it can go, take other Big Ten powers on physically. But the one thing Jerry hasn't proven yet at Minnesota is that he can recruit and develop a winning quarterback. His teams have really won despite his quarterbacks. This team, this program really hasn't had a quarterback you thought could go win you a game since probably Adam Weber, who, by the way, I still think Adam Weber's better than Tim Tebow. People laughed at me when I wrote that, but I really do think. I think that Weber's just one of those guys who needed to land in the right situation. He might have actually had a chance to succeed or at least play a little bit in the NFL. Gopher basketball, I thought their loss was just pretty predictable. I mean, and we don't really need to dissect the game. They went up against a really good program, a top 10 program, and they weren't ready. And the fact that I think they fouled so much because they're probably trying to overcompensate for the fact that they're up against a better team and better athletes. I'm going to actually accentuate the positive here. I love the fact that Richard Pitino is willing to schedule big games like that. I love the fact that he's willing to take on his father, knowing that a victory or a close game or even just some exposure might help him in recruiting, might strengthen, you never know what 18-year-olds are watching or how they make their college decisions. Richard Pitino is doing what he can to get Minnesota out there in front of those 18-year-olds and, sending the message that you're willing to play big teams, that you can get your kids to get on a trip to Puerto Rico. I like that. And I like really everything Pitino has done with this program so far. The Big Ten is really deep in good coaches and good programs right now. I don't know how much success to predict for him going forward, but I think he's done pretty much everything you can ask a young coach to do in terms of being organized, bringing in modern metrics, getting the most out of his players, bringing some real enthusiasm, not Tubby's fake enthusiasm, some real enthusiasm in the program. I think he's doing about all you can expect. It's just I don't know how much you're going to win in the Big Ten this year. Twins, they hire Gene Glynn and Rudy Hernandez to add Tom Bernansky to their coaching staff. I had Mahler on my first podcast, which, by the way, I should have promoted this earlier. This is the Alive and Social Network. This is SOUHAN-UNFILTERED. You can find the iTunes subscription on my Twitter feed. Hell, you can email me and I'll get it to you. So this will be available iTunes, hopefully soon on iHeartRadio, but the easiest way to get it is just go to SOUHANUNFILTERED.com. So I talked to Paul about it, and I was telling him, Eddie Guardado and Torrey Hunter are two of my favorite players of all time. I mean, both as competitors and guys I love to talk to. I hope he brings them on. I think Eddie Guardado would bring kind of an edge to that clubhouse, a competitive edge. If for too long they've just been kind of these quiet guys who sit around and look at their phones in there, I think, and it's not, it was actually a better clubhouse last year than previously. I think Phil Hughes brought a really good personality in there. I think some of the young kids started growing up. I think Dozier continues to develop as the right kind of personality to have in your clubhouse. I think Danny Santana came in and was, unlike a lot of the other young players they've had come through recently, really brought a professional attitude, and I think that helped him play well right away. But I think you need a little bit of grit in there, and that's why I've recommended people like Guardado or Danny Deladden. I think you need somebody who, A, can maybe stuff a player in a locker when he has a bad attitude, but also B, keep the boys loose. There isn't a lot of overt humor in there, and I can't prove that it matters, but all I know is that all the good baseball teams I've ever been around kind of had that needling edge going on. They had people needling each other as a way to keep communication lines open, but also as a way to kind of gently hold each other accountable. I think that matters in baseball. It's just a different sport. It's the only sport where people basically live together every day for 9 months, and I think you have to have ways of communicating with each other that work. In the NFL, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if the left guard and the safety don't like each other, it doesn't affect the way your team plays at all. But in baseball, I think it does matter. I think at least anecdotally and through my experience, it has mattered. So I think Mahler did the right thing bringing Bernansky back. I thought he had a good year. I think that I didn't think it was a good lineup, and Mauer was not very productive or healthy, and they still scored a lot of runs. So you got to give the hitting coach some credit for that, I believe. And I also thought Plouffe became more of a professional hitter too, and again, I give Bernansky credit for that. Gene Glynn, got to know Gene when he was, I think, coaching the Cubs with Don Baylor's staff. That I knew him as a Tampa Bay Rays scout, and I always knew Gene as the guy who was probably better than anybody else, including all the other scouts, at telling you who was about to go into a slump or who was about to get hot. He has a very good eye. He's a very nice guy, former Mr. Minnesota basketball. Has ties to the state, and I think he has a nice touch with the young players. I think he's a logical guy to have on Paul's staff. Rudy Hernandez, born in Venezuela, assistant hitting coach. They probably need more than one, but at least now they have one real Latin American on the staff, someone who can speak Spanish. With the young players who come up, they have to have somebody who can communicate with Miguel Sano and make him feel comfortable and can get the right message across in the right way. Miguel Sano has a huge personality. So far, it's been pretty beneficial. He's shown a lot of competitiveness. But if you go the other way too, they need to have somebody who can communicate with him. Again, I'd like to see Eddie Guardado on the staff. I'd love to see Torrey Hunter playing corner outfield. Paul told me that he thinks I guess I would always say he hinted that both are possibilities. Timberwolves, frankly, I probably had lower expectations for this team than anybody else. I thought this was a 25-win team coming in. Most of my buddies who know basketball and cover basketball were saying more 35, and if everything goes well, maybe 40. I always thought that was way, way optimistic, even if you like what they're doing. Then Rubio gets hurt, and Flip plays Zach LaVine, and I think he handled it pretty well his first game out there. I think he had 9 assists. He kind of ran the offense well, and then things fell apart. Remember, Zach LaVine didn't start at UCLA. And now all of a sudden he's starting in the NBA as a rookie. I think that's asking a bit much. The real problem will be for this team, if you care about this team's record, which I really don't. If you care about this team's record and how it is going forward, what you have to be concerned with is that veteran players will be looking at this and saying, okay, Flip, you're not even giving us a chance to win. You're playing a kid who shouldn't even be on the court yet, who you didn't even play in the first game of the season as a backup, and now you're letting him run things, and now we're getting beat by 44. If you care about the season, that is a bad development. I never expected much out of the season other than to hope that Andrew Wiggins and maybe Anthony Bennett develop into good young players, and that could still happen, but it might not be real pretty to watch. I will go back on one other topic on the NFL. I have to admit, I don't know if I've ever been more shocked by a complete slate of games than I was yesterday. Since a mediocre Cincinnati team winning at New Orleans, that's shocking to me. The Broncos losing at St. Louis, that's shocking to me. I was surprised the Vikings lost at Chicago. I was surprised the Philadelphia Eagles didn't keep it closer. My radio show, I think I picked the Eagles to cover, and obviously they didn't quite come close to that. And this league is always highly unpredictable, but yesterday was one of the most unpredictable days, I think, in the history of the league. And I've been trying to formulate why that happens, why that would be. And the only thing I've come up with, kind of a list of possibilities. I do think that it's a game that you have to be emotionally engaged to play. You can't just walk out on the NFL field and have skills and have it turn out well. You have to be emotionally engaged. And you're not going to be in an emotional peak all 16 games. Even though we want them to be, even though we expect them to be, it's just not realistic. There are going to be some games where they're not as committed as others. That makes a difference. And also the nature of turnovers in the NFL. Turnovers, if you look at the people who do the advanced metrics, they have an immediate impact on the final scoreboard. If you turn the ball over multiple times, and especially in key situations, that can elevate a bad team to the point where they can beat a good team. But it's also a league where these coaches, and this is where it's unlike almost any other sport, these coaches spend 6 days formulating game plans and looking for weaknesses. And in modern NFL, nobody has a great roster top to bottom. You spend your money on stars and you try to fill in with other guys. Every team has weaknesses, and the good coaches can find the lesser players and exploit them. And I think that's why you see Bill Belichick's offenses. One week they'll just run it almost exclusively. The next week they'll throw it almost exclusively. He always just goes after the opposing team's weaknesses. I think that is why you see such wild unpredictability in this game. All right, coming near the close of this podcast on Souhan Unfiltered from Chicago, I will go to my set pieces here, how we end every podcast. My first topic, I was wrong. Yes, this is a very popular topic. I'm just going to go back to the Vikings. I thought they would play well. I thought they would win, and it was pretty embarrassing in performance on both sides of the ball. Stuff people yell at me on the internet. This one was, why don't you grow some balls and ask Mike Zimmer why he doesn't bench Khalil? And there were a whole bunch of either emails or mentions on my Twitter feed about, why don't the reporters get after Mike Zimmer? And I've been doing this since the 80s. I very rarely have I been in a situation where yelling at your interviewee gets you anywhere. I mean, maybe it's entertaining to people watching at home. You talk to a lot of people. Some people you talk to off camera or away from the podium. You try to get as much information as you can. We had 4 reporters here yesterday, including myself. We all try to work the room. And if a coach says something that is just flat out untrue or insultingly prevaricated, let's say, then you fight back. Then you pin them down. And we had those exchanges with Childress a few times where you just tell us something that seemed like it was so ridiculous you had to go after him. Zimmer's just offering his version of events, and we try to lead him down the right road. I didn't see any real reason to get contentious here. And the idea that you're going to bench Khalil, who are you going to play? Who are we going to play? I don't believe that anybody on the Vikings bench is better suited to being a starting left tackle than Matt Khalil. He's just not playing well enough. So I think the emphasis there is getting his mind right this offseason to come back and be ready to play well next year. Otherwise, his career's going to be over. My broadcast review of the day, Phil Simms needs to go away. This isn't in regard to anything yesterday, but Phil Simms I covered as a quarterback with the Giants. He seemed like a brilliant quarterback, and he was a highly successful quarterback. He seemed like a very cerebral guy. I don't know what's happened to him. He might be one of the worst announcers I have ever heard. Song of the day, sitting on the dock of the bay, going old school Otis Redding. Play the song with my band, and just the simplicity, the power, the songwriting, the storytelling. I love that song. Game of the week. I'll go back to that wild game last week against Buffalo. Even though it was a bad opponent, they needed a victory just to relax a little bit. That probably set them up for a weekend of success. Best moment of the week, Zendejos. I've covered a lot of Zendejos. Zendejos fake punt. I thought it was a great call, great play design, great play execution. He followed his blockers really well. Of course, as Chris Cluey said on Twitter, you might want to have the punter take his hands out of his pocket to indicate that he actually is interested in catching the snap. But I did think that was the one good moment in the Vikings game yesterday, along with Harrison Smith's interception return. All right, that's it for Souhan Unfiltered on a Wing It Monday. We'll probably be changing the name and fiddling with all this as we go forward. I'm just getting started on the podcast. I appreciate you listening. You can find our stuff at Alive and Social Network, my podcast at SOUHAN-UNFILTERED.com. You can bug me on Twitter, send me an email, whatever you like. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon.